Welcome back, everyone, for another episode of the Chamber Podcast. I'm Rob Johnson. We have a very interesting guest in the studio today. I'm very excited to dive into, I'll call it an international topic that has size and scope beyond what we've talked about on this show before, I will say. So joining me in the studio is MK Merrigan. She is the founder of MK Advisors. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is going to be a lot of fun. I don't really want to do much of an intro. I'd rather save that for you since you're the expert in this particular field. So for the folks at home wanting to know an elevator pitch of what MK Advisors is all about, take it away.
MK Advisors solves problems for people who need us to solve their problems in communities where access to resource equity is limited or restricted. So my history, to give you some understanding of how we got there, was actually in humanitarian aid. So when I was 16, I left home. Stepdad was undiagnosed with PTSD from Vietnam War. I was diagnosed with PTSD at 21 before we were even at war in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Between 16 and 21, I worked in nonprofit, bringing at-risk youth into environments where their life would change as a result of changing what's happening in those environments. So bringing 18, 19, 20-year-olds into a developing economy, what some people call third world, we call them third world economies, right? Developing economies. That if you gave a kid from inner city Chicago a tool that they could bring into that environment, they would change things. And so that extended on in my life into being in those environments and seeing the lack of resources, seeing a solar panel and a battery, but nothing's on. Somebody dumped it there and got a grant somewhere. So I started to realize the connection between resource equity and quality of life. And so I pivoted from humanitarian aid into bringing the tools of resource equity into the environments that I'm in.
Yeah. And resource equity would be like, basically it's an inventory of resources that a particular group would have that would benefit them directly. Is that a fair way to put it?
Just to give you an example.
Sure.
So I can put a Department of Defense need next to, for resources, next to a community in, let's say, Eastern Africa. And that community in Eastern Africa needs water. They need light. Nobody buys power. They buy the result of power.
Sure.
Same thing is true with the military, right? They don't buy watts. They buy the operational tool to keep their operation running. So I took what we did in Department of Defense, which we'll get into, and applied it to the community. So what I say is, if the community needs clean water, do they have power to create the clean water? Do they have the sustainment and maintenance on the ground to be able to hold that resource for themselves so they own it themselves rather than somebody outside owning that? If we can give them that, that's a community stabilization effort that comes back to us and affects the national security apparatus just as much as it affects that community on the ground, because you're creating resource equity for them, water, light, right? Humanitarian aid. So your vaccines, 70-something% of vaccines that land in sub-Saharan Africa are null and invalid. Why? Because they don't have the temperature control mechanism that requires power through the bush to get from one place to the next. So you create a resource that provides a solution for the community or the partner.
So is it fair to say that your firm is a broker between those two ends? Or a mover?
That's a great word. I'm a refugee from the private equity world, so I don't like the word broker so much as I like. I'm a facilitator. So typically there's a demand that comes in, and we bring the people together to meet that demand. Okay. So yes, it is a brokerage, but it's really it's bringing the right parties together.
Did I catch that right? You said a refugee from the private equity
I'm a refugee from private equity. Yes, I left private equity to use the tools I learned there, but to apply for the people on the ground.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you.
So facilitator. So basically you're putting, you are the chess master. You're putting all the right pieces on the board so people can play the game.
Yes, and in this case, the people that are playing the games are the ones in the game.
Absolutely.
And they're the ones deciding which pieces to move and telling us what tools we need to bring them to get to that next thing.
Love it.
So that they can own the chessboard and not the powers above them.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's great. We took that analogy a long way. I love it.
We can do more of those.
Let's do it. So I think that's the best way to make it simple, because when you look at anything, like if I say carbon capture to somebody, right, they're like, well, that is a very in-depth, scientific, detailed process that has much debate on both sides. And I think where a lot of people lose individuals' buy-in to any concepts is whether or not they can make it simple. And that's huge. So anytime we can do that, I think that's super helpful. So I guess the one of the questions is why? So why is this where you've chosen to spend your time?
Well, so I hit on a little bit of what made me kind of end up here.
Yeah.
But so I was talking to my 15-year-old son about this the other day, and I said, if you had a mission statement as a person, what would your mission statement be? You know, as a 15-year-old. I had to explain what a mission statement was too, by the way.
No, it's good.
Which is great.
Yeah. It's good to start early.
Yeah.
For sure.
So he's a businessman in the making, but in the best way. I told him, I said, after thinking about it, I think mine is to alleviate suffering in every room that I'm in.
Love that.
It's just the basis of who I am. I escaped some of the worst traumas in first world America. Sure. Right? Now, I'm not comparing mine to anything that I've seen around the world or even read about.
Right.
But trauma is trauma, suffering. And if you feel it, live it, then you can identify it. And my urge is to survive the trauma of this world through bringing relief to people who can't otherwise access relief.
Yeah. I love that. I think one of the challenges that a lot of people have, because I think a lot of people would say, yes, that is an aspect of what I want to do. But that's just it, isn't it? It's what you want to do. And now you're showing, well, here's how I am going to do it. And then you take it a step further and you say, this is what we are now doing. So it's a really unique thing to say, you know, this is what I want. This is how we're going to do it. And now we're doing it. So now that's what you're doing. You
just described our incubation process. We incubate businesses around the world because we're trying to not just, we want to work ourselves out of a job, right? The goal would be that you're developing these projects, water, power, whatever, enduring agriculture as a result, right? Carbon sequestration as a result of reforestation, all of those things. The whole goal of that is to not be needed anymore, that the community can exist on their own and they can manage and maintain their own resources in a way that no one can come take it from them because they know it. And so incubating the businesses are just as important as what you put on the ground physically. Creating new jobs, creating new ways of people to have dignity in their work, and they own it as theirs, they will protect it as theirs too.
I like that. So how do you measure success with what you do on the ground?
Probably not well, because I am restless in my spirit to alleviate everywhere I see something that makes my heart jump. Yeah. And I just listen to those signals, right? And, we started a business during COVID and we hired 1,800 artisans. We prepaid those artisans to hand make items to keep their families living. We call that mana. In Hawaii, where I grew up as a child, mana is the energy force that you leave behind. And it can be in things, it can be in tables, it can be in your physical space. Your ancestors leave mana, right? People you love leave mana. And to me, even though we affected 1,800 families in a way that carried them through COVID, doing artistry things, all I can think about is the fact that 90% of those women live in the townships in South Africa, and they don't have running water, and they do not have power, and it's ridiculous. So that, my measurement of success is, and I know this is a very broad one, there are those issues around the world that are not hard to fix if we have enough willpower, and I'm trying to bring all the people with the willpower to the table.
Yeah, do you feel that with the mission that you have, I would imagine that it's, in your assessment, it's never enough. Like you hit one goal and it's like, let's on to the next.
Yeah.
So you're
my poor husband probably.
Well, that's kind of the thing with people that are motivated and driven is like, there's no settling. There's no spot where you're like, yeah, we've done enough. We're good. It's always on to the next thing. And with that, you can never really, I'll speak for myself, you can never really celebrate a win because there's another win to be had out there. And that's what you're focused on now.
Yeah. And I think maybe the difference is that where I mentioned the private equity world, right?
Yeah.
That would be the mentality for the dollars on paper.
Sure.
It's always about the next sale. It's always about the next close. It's the way I went from literally making nothing to making good money, is because once I figured out their algorithm, I just played to that game. You keep closing more deals, you keep getting more pay, right? But using that ambition to actually change things for the better, it's the same fire, but it's coming from a much different and more authentic place. When you're not always driving after the zero on the paper, you're looking at, these women are going home at night after working a full day, taking care of their children, and they don't even have light for their kids to study. Like, are you kidding? Like, how can this be in this world? Why have we all not said this is absolutely wrong and we all need to not sleep until we fix it? That's kind of my mission.
Yeah, no, it's and that's what's difficult, is because there are so many causes, there are so many things that people are down for and advocate for. It's difficult to gain majority awareness over one thing, or something becomes a news trend for 2 weeks and we all hashtag it, and then we forget about it 3 weeks later.
Yeah, this short-term memory, and it's chosen amnesia. We forget the reality of others' suffering when we're sitting in our own. But from somebody who has experienced and seen a lot of suffering, the best way to alleviate that is by alleviating it for somebody else.
Yeah.
And so it may seem altruistic at times, but it's a relief valve. Yeah. And if more people knew that, more people would also be trying to create more relief for others, because it's like a Fibonacci spiral. You start it and it just expands and expands and expands. That's mana. You put the pebble in the pond of change and people jump on. Yeah. You just need enough willpower.
Yeah, it's a never-ending mirage of a ripple effect, for sure. And I guess that would be the challenge, is where do people start? So where do people get involved? Because I know, in this day and age, it used to be if it was on the internet, it was true. I don't know if that was ever the case, actually. But now there's so much distrust, so much misinformation. It's difficult for people to take up causes from a nameless, faceless organization. And that's one thing I like about what you guys are doing, is everything is on Front Street. It's very clear. It's clear who's running it. It's clear what the mission is. So where do people start?
This is the easiest one. It is, we have a running river beneath the surface that's always wanting to talk to us. Whether you define it as God, the source, your higher self, your pure intentions, your subconscious, I don't care how you defined it. It's a river of truth that runs beneath the surface. And in Hawaii, my mentor, who just passed recently, his name is Pono. Pono means the way. Pono said that the way to heal a society is through something we call ahupua'a. Ahupua'a is a shared prosperity. We all rise together. There's something else called ho'oponopono. It means like the clearing of the residue of our ancestral past, the things we left behind. My family were large slave owners in the South. I have a big history in Hawaii, and there's a lot of residue behind what our family has done. Sure. And I think once you start to go inside and identify what that voice is that you're hearing, and listen to the pushing you toward the things, alleviate suffering one little thing at a time. It's not hard to smile at someone who you can feel is having the worst day, and just bringing your energy raises their energy. That's alleviating suffering, even if it's for a moment. So it's just starting with that voice, tapping into that river, and listening and acting. We cannot just hear it. We have to move our feet. Otherwise, the voice slows. It just calms down and you don't hear it as well. It's like my daughter is deaf at a lower frequency. She can't hear at a lower octave. As soon as you get higher, she can hear that, right? It's like we need to tune ourselves to that truth river. It's there. We all have it. Some of us have just been more exposed to it through trauma than others, but it's all there.
Yeah, and those that have been exposed to it recognize the value of somebody being there, recognize the value of the sport. And I would also say that in my assessment, you have multiple options in front of you as a person to jump in and alleviate that pain, whether it's domestic, whether it's foreign. I would say as long as you're on that path of working towards doing that, I would say that's heading in a good direction.
Yeah. There is, I love ancient traditions and ancient texts, and I'm an avid studier of all of the hidden truths, the hidden knowledge, the indigenous truth. And the truth is that once you, at least according to the ancients, is once you decide and set that intention to decide, and you move your feet one in front of the other, that you are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, right? That's in the Hebrew Bible. It's also in other texts in different words. So basically is that, in Hawaii, we believe our ancestors stay with us. It's your pathway. As soon as you start listening, one step in front of the other starts to lead. I mean, I went into modeling at 15. Like who lets their kid, by the way, go into modeling at 15? I went into modeling in Hollywood at 15. I then went back at 17 thinking I'm making my career here. I'm a single person. I'm on my own. I have nowhere to go. What can I do? Well, as a girl who's not unattractive, the body was the only thing I had at the moment. I left that to go into the ministry, which is right. I set the intention that the body's not, I don't want that to be the lead. That's just a byproduct of something else I don't have any control over. I want my impact to be something that other girls can say, I want to do that. Yeah. And I don't want other girls, including my 16-year-old daughter, to say, I wanted to do that modeling thing you did. No. I want you to want to go help alleviate suffering in every room you're in, even if it's just sitting at home and alleviating suffering there. Sit at home and alleviate suffering, would you? Yeah. Like, it's the easiest thing to do once you decide.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing is people getting out of their own head. Depression, anxiety, especially these last 2 years, probably hasn't been particularly helpful for people inside their own headspace. So it's difficult, but it's also encouraging to hear people championing that path because it's not talked about enough. I
will say, everybody who's close in my kind of girl tribe, 2020 and 2021 almost took me out, and it almost took out a lot of people. And when I knew that was something that I needed to address at large in whatever work I'm doing, I'm working on a PTSD thing right now for soldiers, was when I heard about a friend whose sister killed herself on her birthday, her sister's birthday, and she killed herself on that day with 2 small kids. My first thought was just pure sadness for the family, for those children, because I know what that would have done to my children if I would have checked out.
Sure.
The second thought was relief for her suffering. That was when I knew there's something morbidly wrong here in this 2020, 2021 COVID world, where now we're starting to look and say, oh, Naomi Judd killed herself the day before coming out and getting the Lifetime Achievement Award, and her suffering overrode even that. There's a power behind this, and I think when we start talking about it and we start looking at it for what it is, our feet just have to act.
Yeah. Well, it's a subject too, and I think a lot of times we, while not meaning to do so, we encourage people to sit in that and work through it rather than moving forward, which I think is dangerous.
Yeah, I think there's dangerous in any of the extremes.
Sure.
I think that there is something to be said for. My daughter's name is Selah. It's a Hebrew word. It means Salah. It means it's Salah in Hebrew. It means to pause and to take everything in, to reflect. And so I think that there's something to be said for looking at it and saying, I see that pain. I got it. I hear it. I feel it. I know it's there. Okay, now what am I going to do with it?
Right.
So it's not one or the other. It's both. And it's not one or the other in extreme either, because if there's not that reflection and it's all action, you're going to be acting in ways that may not be helping the greater good.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah, you can't stay on it too long either.
Yeah.
So, it's a balance. It's a difficult one.
Mm-hmm.
So I am curious. So how do people get involved with MK Advisors? How would you like people to engage with what you're currently doing, with what your mission is? What would that look like?
Oh, it's a good question. I think until recently, I have been so focused on keeping my head to the ground and just digging it out, just doing the work. Every time that there's a spotlight on an opportunity and the community needs something, we just focus, we just go in. We are doing a lot of incredible things. We have a 5-year contract with USAID to design, which is the aid arm of the U.S. government, to design the utility of the future. What is the utility of the future? Well, we have to have access to that information. How do you have access to that information? Well, you got to see what's messed up now and figure out what those gaps are and get to the next step. So now we're actually in a place with that contract alone. We have a few Army contracts where we're working with the Army on decarbonization and climate change. It's usually people from communities who need something. So like, LA, the city of LA needs a resiliency plan, right? That has climate change involved in it, decarbonization. They call us and they say, hey, you did the resiliency planning for Washington, D.C. for the electrification plan. You've done it for the Department of Defense. You've done it for these communities. Can we use that toolbox? And then we do it. If there are people who are interested in Livingston County and Brighton and Michigan and getting involved in what we do, this company that we incubated called the Mana Boutique, it was previously called Mana Boxes, has the 1,800 women. It's we imported 33,000 handmade items. So the best way to help these women is to go on the manaboutique.com and look at what these women created with their own hands in their own homes, some of them without running water and without light, and buy that. And get involved, follow their stories. Every woman, their stories. We have 400 stories out of 1,800 women. Every woman had a story, we captured 400. What we want to create is a community of shared experience so that you can see how they live and be a part of their story, and they can see how you live and be part of your story. And that connection between us here in the West and people around the world who want to see these things and want to be a part of a bigger story, we can link them together through shared stories, through shared goods, and obviously with MK Advisors, wherever communities have a need around resources, we want to fix those needs.
I love it. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all your effort on that.
Thank you.
Anything else before we wrap up today?
I do have one thing, which is just the state of Michigan is about to start really leading the way on post-traumatic stress syndrome for soldiers. My husband is a 24-year Army veteran. By the way, doesn't show any signs of PTSD, even as a ranger of rangers. But a lot in that community and a lot in everyday military community. The families are suffering. The children are suffering. There's a secondary impact of PTSD that's not being measured and not being addressed. And so I desperately intend to address that with the Adjutant General of the state of Michigan, as well as hopefully Congress will get involved. So I want more military families to come start telling their stories, and we want to capture those so we can use it as real data to force change.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
That's a tremendous effort that you're doing. So mkadvisors.org, friends. That's where you can find all the information. We'll also link up the website for the boutique as well. Well, that's going to wrap up this week's edition of the Chamber Podcast. Appreciate you all watching, listening, whatever you're doing, however you're doing it. We appreciate you following along with what we're doing here. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.